While you are watching this, there are missiles in the air over the Middle East. There is a nation openly declaring that it wants to wipe Israel off the map. And the entire world is watching as if this were something new. It is not. 3,500 years ago, empires far larger, far more powerful, far more feared said the exact same thing. Israel will disappear. Egypt attacked Israel. What happened to Egypt? Assyria attacked Israel. What happened to Assyria? Babylon attacked Israel. What happened to Babylon? Rome attacked Israel. What happened to Rome? And now Iran, the ancient land of Persia, is pointing its weapons at the same people. There is a pattern running through 3,000 years of history that most people have never stopped to see. When you finish this video, you will look at today's news with different eyes. Not eyes of fear, eyes of someone who understands what is really happening. But before we step into history, we need to understand the foundation. Because what you are about to see is not a series of historical coincidences. There is a declaration made 4,000 years ago that functions like a law. Not a law written by men, a law that empires discovered the hard way. In Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, God speaks to Abraham and says something that would echo through every civilization you are about to encounter today. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. 4 words in ancient Hebrew. Simple, direct, no ambiguity. Centuries later, a prophet named Balaam was hired to curse Israel. He opens his mouth to release the curse, and what comes out is the opposite. He says in Numbers 24, verse 9, "Cursed is everyone who curses you, and blessed is everyone who blesses you." He could not do otherwise. Hold on to that declaration, because it is the key to understanding everything you are about to see. Every nation, every empire, every king, they all discovered, some centuries apart, that this declaration was not poetry, it was a sentence. Let us begin at the beginning. Egypt, the greatest superpower of the ancient world. Pyramids that still challenge modern engineering today. An army that made entire nations tremble. And at the heart of that empire, there were slaves. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11 records that the Egyptians set taskmasters over the Israelites to afflict them with heavy burdens. They carried stones. They built cities for Pharaoh. 400 years of slavery. And when Moses stands before Pharaoh and says, "Let my people go," Pharaoh laughs. Who is this God to give me orders? The answer came in 10 acts. Water turned to blood, frogs covering every surface of the country, locusts devastating every harvest, a darkness that could be felt, and then the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, from the son of the servant to the son of Pharaoh. Egypt broke, but Pharaoh changed his mind and sent his army after the Israelites. Exodus 14. The sea opens, Israel passes through, Pharaoh's army enters, and the sea closes. Exodus 14, verse 28. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, and all the host of Pharaoh. Not one of them remained. Not one remained. Egypt never returned to what it once was. It was conquered by Assyria, then by Persia, then by Alexander, then by Rome. The nation that enslaved Israel for 400 years spent the next 1,000 years being ruled by others. The greatest power of the ancient world was broken by a nation of slaves. If Egypt is the most well-known case, the Amalekites are the most disturbing. Because they did not attack an army, they attacked the weak. Deuteronomy 25, verse 18 describes what they did. They met you on the road and attacked all who were lagging behind. They had no fear of God. Israel had just come out of Egypt, freed not long before. women, children, the elderly, marching through the desert. And the Amalekites chose to attack the rear, those who could no longer walk. God's response was not simply a military defeat, it was a sentence. Exodus 17, verse 14. God says to Moses, "I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." Not a battle lost, not a territory taken. The memory erased. Centuries later, 1 Samuel 15, God commands King Saul to completely destroy the Amalekites. Saul defeats the army, but spares King Agag, and spares the best of the livestock. Samuel appears before Saul and speaks one of the heaviest lines in all of Scripture. "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord has also rejected you as king." Saul lost his kingdom for not carrying out the sentence against Amalek. David destroyed them afterward, and the Amalekites disappeared. Completely, no descendants, no nation, no territory. The sentence spoken in the desert was fulfilled. There is not a single Amalekite anywhere on earth today. Now we come to what is, in my view, the most shocking event in all of biblical history. Assyria, the first super empire in human history, an army of documented brutality. They impaled prisoners. They built pyramids out of severed heads. Entire nations surrendered without fighting, just from hearing the name of Assyria. In 722 BC, 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 6, Assyria conquers the northern kingdom of Israel. 10 tribes taken into captivity, scattered. They never returned, but that was not enough. King Sennacherib decides to march on Jerusalem, 185,000 soldiers. He sends a letter to King Hezekiah, and what he writes in that letter is something that still sends chills today. 2 Kings 19, verse 10. He says, "Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria." He was calling God a liar. In front of 185,000 soldiers, Hezekiah takes the letter, goes to the temple, spreads it out before God, and prays. And then comes the answer. 2 Kings 19, verse 35. One of the shortest and most devastating sentences in all of Scripture. "And that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies." One night, 185,000 soldiers. Sennacherib returned to Nineveh in disgrace and was murdered by his own sons while worshipping his god. Decades later, Nineveh, the invincible capital of Assyria, fell in 612 BC, so completely buried that the world forgot it had ever existed. Archaeologists only found it in 1847. The prophet Nahum had described the destruction of Nineveh with such precise detail that skeptical scholars believed he had written it after the fact. He wrote it before. The most feared army on earth vanished in a single night. If the fall of Assyria was sudden, the story of Babylon is slower, more dramatic, and it ends in a way that seems almost impossible. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marches on Jerusalem. 2 Kings chapter 25. Solomon's temple is set on fire. The walls of Jerusalem are torn down. The people of Judah are taken into captivity. The most sacred city in the world in flames. Nebuchadnezzar was at his peak, the most powerful man on earth. And then Daniel chapter 4 records something extraordinary. Nebuchadnezzar himself writes, in his own words, what happened to him. God sends him a warning in a dream. Daniel interprets it and tells the king, "You will be driven from among men, and your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You will eat grass like an ox." 1 year later, while walking through his palace, saying, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built?" a voice came from heaven. And for 7 years, the most powerful man on earth lived in the open fields. He ate grass. His hair grew like eagle's feathers, his nails like birds' claws. 7 years. After Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon began to decline. And then we arrive at the night of Daniel chapter 5. Belshazzar, grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, throws a banquet. He calls for the gold vessels stolen from the temple in Jerusalem. He drinks from them with his nobles, with his concubines. And in the middle of the feast, a hand appears. No body, just a hand, writing on the wall, Mene Mene Tekel Parsin. Daniel is called to interpret, and he says, "You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." That very same night, Belshazzar was killed. Cyrus the Persian had diverted the Euphrates River, entered beneath the walls of Babylon, and took the city without a battle. Isaiah chapter 13, verses 19 and 20, written more than 100 years before, had said, "Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. She will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations." Today, Babylon is a field of ruins in Iraq, uninhabited. Exactly as it was written. This is the most personal case, and perhaps the most disturbing of all, because Edom was not a distant enemy, it was family. The Edomites were descendants of Esau, the twin brother of Jacob, blood relatives of Israel. When Israel was coming out of Egypt, Numbers 20 verse 18, they asked for passage through the land of Edom, a peaceful passage, promising to pay for water. Edom answered, "You shall not pass through, lest I come out with the sword against you." But the darkest moment of Edom was not that one. It was centuries later, when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem. Edom did not attack. They did not need to. Edom stood aside and watched. Obadiah 1 verse 11, one of the most disturbing verses in all of Scripture. "On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them." And Psalm 137 verse 7 records that the Edomites were shouting, lay it bare, down to its foundations," celebrating the destruction of their own brothers. The prophet Obadiah devoted an entire book to the sentence against Edom. Verse 18, "The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. There shall be no survivor for the house of Esau." The Nabateans destroyed Edom. What remained was forced to convert by John Hyrcanus, and after that, no one identifies as an Edomite. Anywhere, in any era, the people who chose to stand aside while Israel burned ceased to exist, while Israel came back. And we arrive at the last one, the most powerful of all, Rome. Roads that still exist today, laws that we still use, a war machine that conquered the known world. In 70 AD, General Titus marches on Jerusalem. The second temple, where Jesus had taught, is destroyed, stone by stone. And here, something extraordinary. Because 40 years earlier, Jesus was leaving the temple with his disciples, and they were pointing at the massive stones in admiration. And Jesus said, Luke 21 verse 6, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." The disciples did not understand. 40 years later they understood. 1 million Jews were killed. The rest were scattered across the world. In 135 AD, Emperor Hadrian renamed the land. He gave it the name Palestine, derived from the Philistines, the historic enemies of Israel, specifically to erase the name of Israel from the map. And then, 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire falls. Centuries later, the Eastern Roman Empire falls. Rome no longer exists as an empire. And Israel. In 1948, after nearly 2,000 years scattered among the nations, the Jewish people returned to the same land, same name, same language. Hebrew, which had ceased to be spoken as a living tongue, came back. Jeremiah 31 verse 10 had said, "He who scattered Israel will gather him, and will keep him as a shepherd keeps his flock." There is not a single other people in human history who were scattered for 2,000 years and returned. Not one. Rome tried to erase Israel from history. Rome no longer exists as an empire. Israel is on the map, and these are only the 6 largest, because the list does not stop there. The Philistines, who tormented Israel for decades, who humiliated Saul and desecrated his body, were destroyed by David and vanished completely from history. The Moabites, who hired the prophet Balaam to curse Israel, and every curse became a blessing, ceased to exist as a people. The Midianites, who oppressed Israel for 7 years, were destroyed by Gideon with 300 men, 300 against 135,000. Antiochus Epiphanes, the king who walked into the temple in Jerusalem, sacrificed a pig on the sacred altar, banned the Sabbath under penalty of death, and declared himself God manifest, died from a disease that rotted his body with worms while he was still alive. The pattern has no exception. Not one. It is time to step back and look at the full picture. Egypt, the Amalekites, Assyria, Babylon, Edom, Rome, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Midianites, the Ammonites. What do all these nations have in common? They tried, with different resources, in different eras, with armies of different sizes, to erase Israel, and not one of them exists as a nation anymore. Not one. Now look at the other side of the equation. Israel was enslaved. It came back. Israel was scattered. It came back. Israel was forbidden to exist. It came back. The name of Israel was erased from the map by an imperial decree. It came back. 2,000 years outside their land. No army, no territory, no capital. And in 1948, they came back. Same name, same land, same language. There is no parallel for this anywhere in human history. There is none. Jeremiah 31, verses 35 and 36. God says, "If the heavens above can be measured and the foundations of the earth below can be explored, then I will cast off all the offspring of Israel for all that they have done." The heavens are still there. So is Israel. So we return to the present. Iran. What few people know or few people stop to think about is that Iran is Persia. The same territory, the same people, the same geographical region that appears in the book of Esther. And in the book of Esther, there is a man named Haman. Haman was the second most powerful man in the Persian Empire. And he had a plan. Esther chapter 3. He convinces King Ahasuerus to sign a decree, the extermination of every Jewish person in the empire. All the people, on a single date. Exterminated. Haman even had a special gallows built, 75 feet high, specifically to hang Mordecai the Jew. Esther 7, verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. On his own gallows. Today, the leadership of Iran openly declares its desire to destroy Israel. It funds armed groups surrounding Israel. It launches missiles toward Tel Aviv. I am not making political predictions. That is not the point. The point is this: every empire that wrote the name of Israel on its list of enemies to be eliminated is today found in history books. Egypt wrote that name. Assyria wrote that name. Babylon wrote that name. Rome wrote that name. None of them made it to the 21st century. And Israel, the people who should have disappeared dozens of times, is still here. There is a line in the book of Numbers, spoken by a prophet who was paid to curse Israel, but who, when he opened his mouth, could only bless. He said, Numbers 23, verse 23, "There is no sorcery against Jacob, no divination against Israel." 3,500 years later, that line still appears to hold true. I do not know what will happen tomorrow in the Middle East. Nobody does, but I know what has always happened. And that alone should make every person on this planet, believer or not, religious or not, stop and think.